Shane set out alone into Glacier National Park. Just him, the trail, and miles of untouched wilderness. But something out there was wrong. The forest got too quiet. The tracks he saw didn't match any animal. And the sounds at night, well, they weren't human. What he experienced in those woods was so disturbing he hasn't slept through the night since. Shane had some time off after finishing a big work project. He craved some peace, so he decided to visit Glacier National Park. This time, he planned a longer stay and a multi-day solo hike through one of the more remote backcountry routes. He booked a campsite near the edge of the park for his first night, intending to head deeper in after checking conditions with the rangers. He arrived in the late afternoon, driving along those scenic roads that skirt the mountains. He said the view was stunning, even though he'd expected that. The mountains, trees, and lakes were just as majestic as any postcard. He rolled down his car windows, took in the crisp air, and felt a sense of relief to be away from city noise. He reached a public campsite near a ranger station, pitched his tent, and strolled around to stretch his legs. A few other people were camped nearby, enjoying a small fire or chatting softly. The atmosphere was calm, and the evening felt clear. The first sign that something was off came from a tired-looking hiker who was packing up to leave the site. Shane passed him near the ranger station. The man had a haunted look, and when Shane asked if he was okay, the man just mumbled that the backcountry was too quiet for him. He mentioned weird noises at night, but didn't elaborate. Shane shrugged it off, figuring the guy might have spooked himself. Lots of folks get jittery alone in the wild. Still, the look in the hiker's eyes stuck in Shane's memory. A brief flicker of warning, maybe, but nothing he took seriously at the time. That evening, Shane talked briefly with a park ranger to confirm the route he wanted to take. He planned to follow a trail that wound through some less traveled parts of the park, away from the busier scenic spots. The ranger gave him the usual advice: check for recent bear activity, store food properly, carry bear spray, watch your step. The ranger also mentioned that some sections could be tricky due to lingering snow patches. Everything seemed normal. Shane went to bed under a bright canopy of stars, lulled by the distant sound of wind in the pines. No strange noises that first night. He slept well, eager to begin his trek at dawn. The next morning, he shouldered his pack and set off. The weather was perfect, cool, bright, and dry. He hiked along a well-maintained trail that led away from the main campsite. After a few miles, he noticed fewer footprints in the dirt. The crowds were gone, replaced by tall trees and bird calls. He felt excited, like this was exactly the solitude he wanted. A couple hours in, he saw a sign indicating a side trail that veered deeper into the wilderness. This was on his map. He planned to follow that route and camp near a small alpine lake he'd seen online. He figured it would be quiet out there, maybe with a view of the glacier peaks in the distance. Exactly what he was looking for. Not long after he turned onto that side trail, he ran into two hikers coming the opposite way. They looked tired, as if they'd spent a few days out. He asked them about trail conditions. They gave standard comments: some muddy patches, a little snow here and there, watch out for black bears rummaging near certain areas. Nothing that set off alarm bells. But when Shane casually asked if they'd seen anything strange, they got tense. One of them said they'd heard howling at night, but it didn't sound like wolves. The other just shrugged and said they kept their campfires burning a little longer because of it. Then they moved on. Shane told me he felt a small flicker of unease, but chalked it up to typical wilderness jitters. People often hear sounds they can't identify in the woods. It could be a fox, a coyote, or even the wind echoing weirdly between ridges. He wasn't about to panic over it. He pressed on, enjoying the scenery. He noticed how clear the air smelled, how the pine needles crunched underfoot, and how easy it was to forget everyday worries out there. The trail meandered through tall trees, over a few creeks, and up gentle slopes. By mid-afternoon, he reached a sign pointing to the Alpine Lake. That was his destination for the night. He had plenty of daylight left to set up camp and gather firewood. On his way, he spotted large paw prints in a patch of mud near a creek. He stopped and studied them, guessing they were from a black bear, though they looked a bit bigger than what he'd seen before. Still, it was likely just a big one. He made a mental note to keep his food secured and to remain alert. The lake turned out to be beautiful. Calm water reflecting snowy peaks, surrounded by clusters of evergreens. No one else was around. He picked a flat spot 100 yards from the shoreline and set up his tent. He filtered some water, gathered wood for a small fire, and felt satisfied with his progress. The sky was clear, the sun was warm, and he had the entire place to himself. That night, things started to get weird. Shane built a small fire and cooked a simple meal. The evening was peaceful at first. A mild breeze rustled the treetops, and the lake's surface shimmered in the fading light. He watched the sky turn orange and pink behind the mountains. After finishing dinner, he stowed his food in a bear canister and secured it away from his tent. He sat by the fire for a while, thinking about life, enjoying the stars. Nothing seemed off until he heard a distant noise across the water. It sounded like a moan or a howl, very faint. He froze and listened. It didn't repeat. Could have been the wind. He tried to shake it off, but a small pit formed in his stomach. Later, he heard it again, closer, echoing over the lake. Not a wolf, not any animal he recognized. He said it was a low, wailing sound carrying across the water in the still night air. He got up, shone his flashlight around, and saw nothing unusual. No reflections of eyes in the distance, no movement. But that sound got under his skin. Trying to calm himself, he added more wood to the fire. The glow pushed back some of the darkness. He convinced himself it could be a coyote with a weird call, or maybe even an elk. He didn't want to panic. Still, he found himself glancing into the trees every few minutes, heart pounding. At some point, exhaustion took over and he decided to turn in. He doused the fire thoroughly, made sure his food was properly stashed, then zipped himself into his tent. He said he slept fitfully, half waking at every rustle. Each time he'd hold his breath, listening for that wail. Eventually he drifted off. In the morning he woke to a quiet sunrise. No footprints around his camp, no sign of trouble. He chalked up the previous night's noises to his imagination or some wildlife he didn't recognize. Shane felt determined not to let one eerie night ruin his trip. He packed up and followed the trail that looped around the lake and continued westward. His plan was to spend 2 more nights out in the backcountry, eventually linking up with a different trail that led back to a ranger station. The first part of that day's hike was uneventful. He passed some meadows bursting with wildflowers, saw a few birds overhead, and enjoyed the sense of isolation. Though the memory of that weird howl lingered, he tried to focus on the natural beauty. Around midday, he stumbled on an old campsite. It looked abandoned, with a collapsed tent and scattered trash. At first, he assumed it might be from irresponsible campers who left a mess, which angered him. As he got closer, he noticed scratch marks on the tent fabric. The poles were snapped as if something heavy had leaned or stepped on them. Food wrappers were strewn around, which made him think maybe a bear had raided the camp. But the slash marks on the tent seemed odd. They were long and deep, more like claws. He glanced around for bear tracks, but only saw partial impressions in the dried mud. He felt uneasy. If a bear had hit that camp, it could still be nearby. He took out his bear spray and made noise to alert any wildlife. Then he quickly moved on, not wanting to linger. The idea that a large predator might roam the area made him cautious. He checked the map to see if there were alternate paths, but the direct route was still the best way forward. That afternoon, the trail gained elevation. Shane climbed a series of switchbacks, surrounded by thick forest. He paused at a rocky overlook to catch his breath and admire the view. From up there, he could see valleys and ridges all covered in pine. The wide expanse reminded him of just how alone he was. Part of him loved that feeling. Another part, remembering the shredded tent, felt uneasy. He pressed on, wanting to find a suitable campsite before dark. That meant descending the other side of the ridge. As he neared the lower slopes, he glimpsed an animal in the distance. It was moving among the trees, too far to identify. He stopped, squinted, and could just make out a tall, slim shape. It didn't move like a bear on all fours, nor like a deer bounding along. More like something walking upright, hunched, weaving between trunks. But it vanished too quickly for him to get a clear look. He stood there for a minute, heart racing. Maybe it was just another hiker. But if so, why did it dart away? He called out a friendly hello and waited. No reply. Silence except for the breeze. He moved on, telling himself maybe his eyes played tricks on him. In the wilderness, it's easy to mistake shapes and shadows for something else. Yet he couldn't fully shake the image. By late afternoon, Shane found a flat clearing near a creek. It wasn't an official campsite, but it looked decent. He set up his tent, placed his bear canister at a distance, and gathered some fallen branches for a campfire. He tried to relax, cooking a small meal over the flames. The water gurgled nearby, and the setting sun painted the sky. He should have felt calm, but he told me there was a heavy feeling in the air, as if the forest was watching him. He kept glancing over his shoulder. Once darkness set in, he heard the howling again, faint but distinct. It was that same low, mournful sound he'd heard near the lake. His stomach twisted. He reminded himself that wild animals make strange calls, but the tone felt unnatural. This time it sounded closer too. He built the fire higher, hoping the light would deter whatever might be out there. Hours passed, and he sat by the flames, refusing to turn in. Around midnight, he heard branches snapping in the distance. Then came a series of thuds, like heavy footsteps moving over uneven ground. He grabbed his flashlight and swept it around. Nothing. The noises stopped. After a tense few minutes, he heard them again, closer this time. Thud, crunch, thud, like something walking upright. He called out, "Who's there?" No answer, just the fading of those steps. He tried to rationalize it, maybe a moose or a bear walking oddly, but moose steps usually sound different, and a bear moves on 4 legs. Those thumps sounded like bipedal footfalls. He had no explanation, but adrenaline pumped through his veins. Eventually, everything went silent again. He stayed up until he couldn't keep his eyes open. He banked the fire, crawled into his tent, and lay awake for what felt like hours, listening for any noise. At some point, exhaustion overtook him, and he slept in fits. When he emerged at dawn, the campsite was undisturbed, but he felt shaky. He knew something was off in these woods. Part of him considered heading straight back, but the next ranger station was not too far ahead, according to his map. So he decided to finish the route and report the strange events. Shane packed quickly, eager to leave that clearing. The trail led deeper into a rugged valley. It was a gorgeous stretch, tall pines on both sides, a rushing stream, and wildflowers along the banks. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a dream hike. Instead, he was on edge, scanning for any signs of movement. A few miles in, the path forked. He checked his map and compass to confirm which way led to the ranger station. As he stood there, he heard a sudden noise, a shrill cry that echoed between the trees. It was different from the moaning, more like a sharp scream. He froze in place. Then the scream cut off abruptly, as if choked. His hair stood on end. That was no ordinary animal. Something was in distress, or being attacked. Heart pounding, he moved forward, staying alert. He soon noticed red spatters on some rocks near the stream. Blood. His mind raced. Maybe a predator had taken down a deer. It's not unusual in nature, but the amounts on the stones looked concerning. He followed the droplets, half out of worry and half out of a strange compulsion to see what was happening. Not far from the trail, he found more signs of a struggle. Trampled ferns, broken branches. A large patch of damp earth was smeared with blood, and bits of fur were scattered around. Shane guessed it might have been a deer carcass, but the fur didn't look like deer hair. It was coarser, almost grayish, and the prints around the spot were confusing. There were definitely large paw marks, but also deeper impressions that might have been made by a bipedal creature. He couldn't piece it all together. He felt a sudden wave of revulsion and fear. Whatever happened here had been brutal, and it wasn't clear if the predator was still nearby. He backed away, forcing himself not to panic. His best bet was to keep moving, get to the ranger station, and inform them. He hiked at a faster pace, clutching his bear spray. The hush of the forest pressed in on him, broken only by the rushing stream. Around midday, Shane caught up with 2 other hikers. They looked surprised to see someone coming from that direction. He told them about the bloodied patch he'd come across, and they swapped uneasy glances. One of them mentioned hearing local tales of a Wendigo in these parts. Shane recalled the term, something from indigenous folklore about a cursed spirit or creature that's always hungry. He'd heard about it in horror stories, but never took it seriously. Still, the hiker insisted that people sometimes claimed to see a gaunt figure roaming the woods, letting out unearthly howls. Shane's gut twisted. He wanted a rational explanation, a bear, a mountain lion, something he could put a name to. But these rumors kept popping up, and it matched the strange footprints, the howling, the upright shape he thought he saw. The 2 hikers said they were cutting their trip short because of bad vibes and a sense that something followed them. Shane told them he'd continue to the ranger station. They wished him luck, advising him not to travel after dark if he could help it. He pressed on, mind churning with questions. Why would a creature like this roam Glacier National Park? And if it was real, how had no official records emerged? Of course, lots of people claim to see strange creatures in the wild, and many go unverified. Shane tried to stay level-headed. He reminded himself that fear can conjure illusions. But the evidence, odd footprints, shredded camps, bizarre noises, kept piling up. He tried to focus on reaching safety. That afternoon, he climbed another ridge. The path grew narrow, hugging a steep slope. He was careful with each step, not wanting to twist an ankle. At one point, a wave of rancid odor hit him out of nowhere. It smelled like decay, thick and foul, making him gag. He saw no dead animal or visible source, but the smell lingered in the air. He quickened his pace, fighting the urge to run. By dusk, Shane realized he wouldn't make the ranger station that day. He still had miles to go. He found a campsite marked on his map, a small clearing near a grove of tall pines. Reluctantly, he set up his tent. He felt he had little choice. The trail was rugged and hiking at night was too risky. He built a fire, kept his gear close, and tried to calm himself by going through a routine. Boil water, cook dinner, store leftovers securely. The forest around him felt tense. The usual chorus of birds and insects seemed muted, as if everything was on high alert. He heard a few night sounds, but they were sporadic. Despite his fatigue, Shane decided not to sleep right away. He wanted to keep watch. He felt as though something might happen. Sure enough, after darkness settled, he heard soft footsteps nearby. They paused, then resumed. He aimed his flashlight around, but the beam revealed only tree trunks and shrubs. Then to his left, he caught a glimpse of movement. The light flashed over a shape that seemed tall and thin, slipping behind a trunk. Shane's breath caught. He edged closer to the fire, hoping it would keep whatever was out there at bay. Minutes later, the footsteps circled behind his tent. He twisted around, shining the light, and for a split second, he saw it. A gaunt figure, with limbs too long to be human, standing in the shadows. Its eyes reflected a pale shine, and he glimpsed patches of darkened skin stretched tight over bone. Shane panicked, dropping the flashlight beam. By the time he angled it back up, the figure was gone. He felt his heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst. He'd never seen anything like that. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a human. It looked like something out of a nightmare. He told me he was almost too scared to move, but he forced himself to keep the fire going and to clutch his bear spray. He considered making a run for it, but where? The forest at night was treacherous, and the station was miles away. The next few hours were a blur. He stayed by the fire, listening to the creature circle his camp. Sometimes he heard low moans or growls in the darkness. Other times, branches snapped. He caught more glimpses, an arm here, a flash of movement there. Once, it came within 20 feet of the fire, staying just at the edge of the light. He saw that it stood upright, with unnaturally long arms, a skeletal frame, and a head shaped almost like a deer skull, but covered in patches of twisted flesh. He couldn't see details clearly, just the outline. The smell of decay rolled in whenever it neared. Shane couldn't believe what was happening. He felt like he'd stepped into a horror story. He recalled the word Wendigo and realized, with mounting horror, that he might actually be facing one. By some miracle, it didn't rush him. It just circled, as if probing or waiting. Eventually, as the sky hinted at dawn, the creature drifted away into the trees. He stayed rooted in place, trembling, until the sun's early light trickled through the canopy. The moment it was bright enough, Shane threw his gear together. He didn't bother with breakfast. He had to get out. He left behind anything non-essential to lighten his pack, hoping he could cover ground faster. His legs wobbled from lack of sleep, but adrenaline fueled him. He hiked at a near jog, scanning the forest constantly. After about an hour, he stumbled onto a small tributary stream. He recognized it on his map as one that ran closer to the ranger station. Following its course might cut some distance. He turned off the main trail, pushing through brush and uneven terrain. It was risky, but he wanted a more direct route. He spent the morning forging ahead, slipping on wet rocks, climbing over fallen logs. Every so often, he sensed movement in the corner of his eye. Branches rustled in odd ways. The stench of decay would come and go. It felt like that thing was tracking him, letting him know it was still there. He tried to ignore the fear, focusing on staying upright and moving forward. In the early afternoon, he reached a more open stretch of forest. He could see a low rise ahead beyond which the ranger station should be. Relief mingled with dread. He was so close, but the sense of being followed refused to fade. He heard that wail again, this time behind him, maybe a few 100 yards off. His pulse skyrocketed. He began to run. He couldn't help it. Logic told him running might trigger a chase, but terror drove him. As he sprinted, he heard a crash of branches. Glancing back, he spotted the creature bounding through the trees, impossibly fast despite its gangly frame. It let out a shriek that chilled his blood. He had never felt such pure panic. He panted, stumbling on roots, pushing through branches that scratched his arms. The station was somewhere on the other side of that rise. Then he tripped. A root snagged his foot, and he went sprawling. Pain shot through his knee. He scrambled up, one hand clutching bear spray. He whirled around, expecting the creature to lunge. Instead, he saw it standing about 20 yards away, partially hidden by a spruce. Its hollow eyes locked on him. He noticed it had antler-like growths, broken and twisted. Its mouth hung open, revealing jagged teeth. Shane raised the bear spray, hands shaking. The creature let out a sound, almost like a mocking laugh. Then it melted back into the trees, its footsteps surprisingly quiet. Shane wasted no time. He pressed on, limping, tears of frustration blurring his vision. He was so close. He just had to make it a bit farther. Every step sent pain shooting through his leg. He expected at any moment to feel claws on his back, but the woods stayed silent, as if the creature was letting him run. Shane finally crested the rise and caught sight of the ranger station down a slope. A wave of hope washed over him. He half slid, half ran down the hill, practically crashing into a clearing behind the station. He saw a small building, a radio tower, and an official park truck parked outside. A ranger emerged, startled by Shane's sudden arrival. He looked pale, disoriented, clearly in rough shape. The ranger hurried to him, asking what happened. Between gasps, Shane blurted out bits about being stalked by something. A creature in the woods, possibly a Wendigo. The ranger's eyes widened and he told Shane to come inside. They got him seated, gave him water, and looked at his knee. Another staff member joined them. Shane tried to explain the footprints, the howls, the horrifying shape he saw. The rangers exchanged uncertain glances. They said they'd go investigate, but also pointed out that official records didn't mention anything that matched his description. Maybe something diseased or injured that made it move oddly. Shane insisted that wasn't what he saw. He asked them to at least be cautious. The rangers radioed for additional support, planning to check the area in a few hours. In the meantime, they put Shane in a back room and let him rest. He was so exhausted he nearly collapsed into a fitful sleep. Though he was safe inside, he couldn't shake the terror that the creature might come crashing through the windows at any moment. When he woke, they told him a park medic was coming to examine his knee, and then they would guide him out of the park. Shane asked if he could stay at the station until he was cleared to leave. The rangers agreed. He didn't object. He wanted out, but he also didn't want to risk meeting that creature again. Shane told me the strangest part was that he felt both intense relief and lingering dread. Even inside those walls with other people around, he felt the creature's presence in his mind, as if it had marked him. He kept replaying the moment he saw its face, the mocking sound it made, the way it let him flee. He half expected it to appear outside the station at sunset, pacing in the tree line, but it never did. At least not while he was there. Eventually, the medic arrived, determined Shane's knee was sprained but not broken. They loaded him into a vehicle and drove him down to a larger ranger outpost near a main road. From there, he got a ride to a nearby town and booked a motel. He considered going to a hospital, but the local clinic was enough for his minor injuries. Over the next few days, he stayed in that motel, regaining strength. Part of him considered warning everyone he could about what lurked out there, but he knew most people would dismiss it as stress or some misidentified bear. Shane returned home shortly after. He told me the entire story with a sort of numb disbelief, as though he was recounting someone else's nightmare. He wasn't sure if the park rangers found anything. If they did, they never contacted him. He tried calling the station once to ask about updates, but they just said they couldn't share details about an ongoing investigation and that no conclusive evidence was found of any unusual wildlife. For a while, Shane had nightmares about that gaunt shape circling his camp. He told me he'd never forget the smell of decay or the hollow eyes that locked on to him. He hasn't returned to Glacier National Park. Part of him still loves the outdoors, but he's definitely shaken. He said he might eventually go back with a group, never alone. The sense of isolation he once craved now terrifies him, because out there, if something goes wrong, there's no one to help. When he told me this story, I believed him. I could tell he wasn't making it up for attention. The fear in his eyes was real, and the little details, like the footprints, the abandoned camps, the unnatural howls, lined up too well to be a simple misunderstanding. Maybe there is some rational explanation, but for Shane, it felt like a brush with something beyond normal. He's convinced a Wendigo followed him in those woods, toyed with him, and let him escape. Why it didn't attack, he can't say. Maybe it was waiting for a chance, or maybe it fed recently, or maybe it just enjoyed the chase. He believes the Wendigo is still out there, roaming under the cover of thick trees, waiting for the next lost hiker to stumble too far from safety. He hopes nobody else has to find out the hard way. And that's pretty much where his story ends. He escaped, and that was all he could do.